In the silence of war, where orders are obeyed and questions buried, some truths claw their way to the surface. This is not the story you've heard in textbooks or seen in museums. It's the one hidden beneath floorboards, whispered through tunnels, smuggled in letters no one was meant to find. Once you open this, there's no unseeing it. Step quietly, you're about to uncover what was never meant to survive. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of Stalingrad, echoing between scorched brick and twisted steel. Winter had settled in, cruel and without mercy. Snow coated the ground like a shroud, covering bodies that would never be buried. It was January 1943, and the city was a frozen graveyard. Among the ruins moved a figure known only to the Germans as the Ghost. Her name was Vera Leonova. She had been a prima ballerina in Leningrad before the war. Her photo had once adorned theater programs, now replaced with a rifle in her hands and blood on her gloves. When the invasion came, Vera joined the Red Army as a volunteer sniper. She trained under the NKVD, learning the art of patience, silence, and death. Within a month, she was outpacing her male counterparts in confirmed kills. By December, the Germans spoke of her in whispers. Some believed she was a myth, a fabrication of Soviet propaganda. Others claimed to have seen her vanish into smoke after gunning down entire squads. But Vera was real. She moved through the labyrinth of broken buildings and shattered tram lines with uncanny grace, as if dancing through rubble. She used sewer tunnels to travel unseen, climbing up through manholes to reach vantage points unnoticed. Her Mosin-Nagant rifle had her initials scratched into the stock, along with the dates of her most significant kills. She never smiled, and rarely spoke. Her unit commander, Major Orlov, once asked her how she kept sane. She responded, "I imagine I'm on stage. The enemy is the audience. I give them a final performance." Her most famous shot was taken from a bell tower near the burned-out tractor factory. German officers had gathered for a strategy meeting in a nearby building. From 700 meters away, Vera fired once. The bullet passed through a window, killing Oberst Heinrich Keitel instantly. Before the others could react, she reloaded and fired again, hitting a second officer. She slipped away through the roof just before Luftwaffe bombers reduced the tower to rubble. Vera never celebrated. Her letters, later recovered from a broken suitcase buried under a collapsed stairwell, were addressed to her mother and sister, both presumed dead in the siege of Leningrad. In them, she asked whether the snow had reached their garden, whether the tea tins were still on the shelf. She described the cold more than the violence, and never mentioned her kill count. Her handwriting was precise, delicate, and utterly human. By January, Stalingrad had become a place where no rules applied. Soviet snipers fought German sharpshooters in a deadly cat-and-mouse game through bombed-out buildings. Vera played the game better than anyone. She painted her face with soot to blend into shadows. She covered her rifle with tattered cloth to avoid the glint of light. And she waited, sometimes for days, motionless, breathing through a cloth to prevent fog on her scope. A German sniper known only as the Wolf became obsessed with killing her. He had served on the Eastern Front since 1941 and lost his brother in the early days of Operation Barbarossa. When word of the Ghost reached him, he requested reassignment to Stalingrad. For weeks, he left baited traps, helmets on sticks, fake patrols, even wounded soldiers used as lures. Vera saw through them all. The showdown came in the ruins of a railway yard. Vera had tracked the Wolf for 2 days, having spotted the unique claw mark etched on his rifle stock through her scope. She followed him to a derelict train car overlooking the Volga. Inside, he had set up a sniper's nest, fortified with sandbags and steel sheets. Vera climbed to the roof of a nearby grain silo, waited 8 hours without food or movement, and then fired. The bullet pierced the only exposed gap between the eye and the bridge of the nose. The Wolf died instantly. When news of her victory spread, Soviet propaganda officers pushed to photograph her, make her a national icon. Vera refused. She continued to fight, but she never again took part in coordinated missions. She worked alone. Her final mission occurred just days before the German surrender in Stalingrad. A column of retreating Wehrmacht soldiers had taken refuge in a warehouse near the river. Vera climbed to the rooftop opposite and began picking them off one by one. As she fired her seventh shot, an artillery shell struck her position. The roof collapsed beneath her. Vera Leonova was declared missing in action. In 1993, a demolition crew clearing post-Soviet industrial debris discovered a skeleton in a collapsed stairwell beneath an old Soviet barracks. Nearby was a rusted rifle, its stock carved with a name and a dozen tally marks. Beside it lay a small satchel containing letters, a ballet slipper, and a silver locket. DNA tests confirmed her identity. The Russian Federation awarded her a posthumous medal for valor, but her name remains absent from most history books. No statues were raised. No operas written in her name. But among old veterans who fought on the Volga, there are still those who remember her. The quiet girl with the dancer's heart and a sniper's aim. The ghost who haunted Stalingrad not with fear, but with resolve. In war, legends are often born in propaganda. But sometimes, they're real. June 1, 1944. The air was thick with tension in a small chateau outside Cannes. Inside, under flickering candlelight, 3 people pored over German maps and forged documents. In just 5 days, Allied forces would launch the largest amphibious invasion in history, Operation Overlord. But its success didn't depend solely on tanks and warships. It hinged on deception. And that deception began with a man named Nathan Kravitz. Nathan was a first-generation American born to Polish-Jewish immigrants in Brooklyn. A linguist and printer by trade, he had a gift for mimicry, and a disdain for fascism that burned hotter than any flame. He joined the OSS in 1942, quickly becoming their expert in forgery and psychological warfare. Fluent in German, French, and Yiddish, Nathan forged Nazi documents so perfectly that even Wehrmacht officers couldn't tell the difference. But Operation Paperbridge would test more than his skills, it would test his soul. The plan was audacious. Allied High Command wanted to convince the Germans that the D-Day invasion would land not in Normandy, but in Calais, 200 kilometers to the northeast. British intelligence was already conducting massive disinformation under Operation Fortitude. Nathan's mission was smaller in scale but equally vital. Plant forged orders, maps, and correspondence suggesting a paratrooper drop behind Calais. The materials had to look authentic, carry real German signatures, and be placed inside actual occupied command posts. For this, he needed help. Enter Liz. Codename only. Her real name was Emilienne Rousseau, a schoolteacher turned resistance fighter after her fiancé was executed by the Gestapo. She operated a covert network in Normandy that specialized in false identities, train sabotage, and moving people through the bocage. She was known for 2 things, never failing a mission, and never leaving a comrade behind. Nathan met Liz in a Paris cafe 2 months before D-Day. Their handshake lasted longer than necessary. She assessed him quickly, his soft hands, city mannerisms, and awkward French. She wasn't impressed. But when he showed her a forged letter that fooled even her German informant, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Together with a British radio operator named Clark, they formed a 3-person team responsible for what would later be dubbed the Paper War. Their plan was to infiltrate 3 key German outposts near Rouen, Evreux, and Abbeville, planting carefully prepared dossiers hinting at a massive airborne division being moved into Kent, poised to drop into Calais. The operation began on June 2nd. Posing as a pair of Belgian archivists inspecting regional offices, Nathan and Liz entered the first outpost in Rouen. Nathan wore the uniform of a German logistics officer, complete with forged papers authorizing him to transfer priority documents between regional hubs. The commandant barely looked at them. They planted the documents in a desk drawer marked, "Abwehr, do not file." By nightfall, they were gone. The second outpost proved more difficult. In Evreux, they were stopped by a suspicious sergeant who noticed that Nathan's uniform bore an outdated insignia. Quick-thinking Liz feigned outrage, claiming to be the niece of General Kesselring himself. The sergeant backed off, but they knew their window was closing. As they rode away on bicycles through back roads, Liss warned Nathan, "One more misstep and we're dead." By June 4th, they reached the third outpost. This time, everything went wrong. Clark, the radio man, had gone missing. No signal. No rendezvous. Nathan and Liss had no choice but to continue without him. Disguised as civilian clerks, they entered the Abbeville station, this time under heavier scrutiny. Their forged papers didn't match the current authorization lists. As an officer reached for his pistol, Liss dropped a folder, papers spilling everywhere. Nathan used the moment to draw his concealed pistol and shot the officer. Alarms sounded. They fled through a back window, bullets chasing them into the forest. For 3 days, they hid in a root cellar beneath a burned-out farmhouse, surviving on potatoes and rainwater. Clark never came. On June 6th, they heard it, the distant rumble of naval bombardment. Operation Overlord had begun. They'd done their part. But as the Allies stormed the beaches, the Gestapo began their own manhunt inland. Nathan insisted Liss escape through a tunnel network her resistance cell had mapped months earlier. She refused, until he lied and told her that her brother was waiting on the other side. She kissed him once, hard, and vanished into the dark. Nathan didn't follow. When British paratroopers liberated Abbeville 2 weeks later, they found no trace of him. The Germans had executed several suspected spies in the town square, but no confirmed identity was ever matched to Nathan Kravitz. The OSS listed him as missing in action. Some claimed he had been captured and tortured for information. Others believed he escaped and chose to live anonymously in post-war France. Liss survived the war. She returned to teaching, eventually writing a memoir under a pseudonym. In one chapter, she describes a dream where she sees Nathan in a crowded Paris train station, reading a German newspaper and pretending not to notice her. She never saw him again. Decades later, a private collector in Brussels uncovered a set of German documents in an estate auction, meticulously forged orders dated June 3, 1944, detailing an airborne division poised to strike Calais. The forger had signed the bottom in invisible ink, NK. Military historians now agree that these planted files contributed to German High Command's confusion in the critical first 48 hours of D-Day, causing delays in troop deployments north of Normandy. For those who survived the beaches, Nathan Kravitz's work may have saved thousands of lives. But for Liss, it was never about numbers. It was about a quiet man from Brooklyn who fought a war with paper and lies, and disappeared before she could ask him if any of it had been worth it. In the official wartime portrait taken in 1941, Kenji Aoki stands rigid beside Emperor Hirohito, camera slung over one shoulder, face blank. The photo became iconic in Imperial Japan, appearing in newspapers, textbooks, and wartime propaganda leaflets. But it was not the image that defined Kenji Aoki. Hidden behind his official photographs was a second archive, one never intended for public view. An archive of ruin, doubt, and quiet rebellion. Kenji was born in Kyoto in 1911 to a family of calligraphers. He studied photography in Tokyo in the 1930s, drawn to the art of capturing stillness in motion. His early work focused on city life, children playing in alleys, and reflections in puddles after rain. But as Japan militarized, his lens was redirected. In 1937, conscripted into the Imperial Ministry of Information, Kenji was assigned to document Japan's expansion into China. His photos were used to glorify conquest, the triumphant soldier, the grateful villager, the sunrise over occupied cities. But the camera never lied to Kenji. Behind every orchestrated scene, he saw the faces of the displaced, the bruises, the blood on boots scrubbed clean for photos. His private negatives, never developed, showed the reality of Nanjing, where buildings burned and rivers ran with corpses. He buried them in a lead-lined box beneath the floorboards of a government hostel, never daring to speak of them. By 1940, Kenji had risen in status. His photographs adorned recruitment posters and were displayed in state exhibitions. He traveled with generals, posed with admirals, and learned how to frame war as divine destiny. Yet something changed in him during the Philippines campaign. He had captured a moment, a Japanese soldier sharing a cigarette with a captured American pilot, both barely more than boys. The image was gentle, raw, unfit for publication. It was confiscated, and he was reprimanded for romanticizing the enemy. When the firebombing of Chongqing began, Kenji stopped taking orders. He began to shoot double exposures, one for the ministry, one for himself. In his hidden roles, he captured civilians sifting through rubble, a girl cradling a broken doll, a mother screaming silently into a collapsed wall. His artistry turned to witness-bearing. Tokyo became his crucible. In March 1945, the B-29 raids reduced much of the city to ash. Kenji's neighborhood was obliterated in the first wave. He returned from a photo assignment in Yokohama to find his home leveled. His wife and son had sheltered beneath a bridge. Only bones remained. He walked the smoldering ruins until his shoes melted. In the days that followed, he shot photograph after photograph. Not for the ministry, not for history, but for the dead. Charred bodies in a schoolyard. Burnt kimonos fluttering from trees like mourning flags. Faces of children preserved mid-scream, skin fused to stone. Kenji wandered through Tokyo like a revenant, capturing what could not be described. His camera was no longer a tool. It was a confessional. In April, he was summoned to the palace. The emperor was to issue a public statement for the first time since the war began. Kenji was ordered to take his portrait. When Hirohito entered the room, Kenji's hands trembled for the first time in his career. The emperor spoke softly, almost apologetically, about sacrifice, unity, and destiny. Kenji took the shot, but inside, something cracked. That night, he developed two prints, one for the state, and one he altered. In the second, he exposed the film twice, once with the emperor's portrait, and again with a photograph of a mother cradling her burned child. The images bled together, authority and anguish, divinity and death. He sealed the photo in a tin box and buried it in a bomb crater in Ueno Park. As the war drew to a close, Kenji was among the few civilians allowed inside the palace grounds during the emperor's surrender broadcast in August. He photographed the moment, Hirohito standing beneath a cracked imperial seal, surrounded by stone-faced generals. But he took one more photo, in secret, his own reflection in a shattered mirror beside the throne room door. A ghost with a camera. After Japan's surrender, U.S. occupation forces seized thousands of government documents and photographs. Kenji cooperated, turning over the official archives. But he withheld his private work. He hid the negatives inside a false bottom of his camera case and escaped scrutiny. In 1952, with Japan regaining its sovereignty, Kenji vanished. Some believed he had fled to the mountains. Others said he committed suicide. In truth, he took a job as a janitor in a Tokyo photo lab under a false name. He developed other people's memories, weddings, graduations, portraits of smiling families who never asked about the war. Decades later, in 1987, a university professor restoring post-war photography stumbled across a mislabeled box in a defunct lab archive. Inside were over 400 negatives, most never seen publicly. They depicted the war's underside, not soldiers or victory parades, but grief, poverty, shadows. One photograph stood out, a young woman, bald from fire, clutching a child whose eyes stared directly into the lens. In the background, a billboard read, "Endure for the Emperor." It was signed in kanji, Aoki. The collection was dubbed the Forbidden Archive and exhibited in New York, Berlin, and Seoul. It sparked outrage in Japan's nationalist circles, praise from international historians, and silence from the government. To this day, no official monument bears Kenji Aoki's name. But for those who stand before his photographs, the real ones, not the polished portraits of glory, they see the truth. War not as pageantry, but as pain. Not as destiny, but as consequence. Kenji's legacy was not in the images he was paid to take, but in those he risked everything to preserve. The emperor's photographer had become the empire's accidental conscience. And in every frame, the question remains, what is the price of capturing lies, and the cost of revealing the truth? The snow fell silently over the Norwegian mountains, thick and unforgiving, masking every footprint and sound. In the distance, the Rjukan Valley held its secret, the Vemork heavy water plant, nestled like a fortress into the cliffs above the frozen Mana River. It was 1943, and the Allies feared this remote installation more than any front line. For inside it, deep beneath reinforced concrete and armed guards, Nazi scientists were harvesting heavy water, deuterium oxide *, a critical ingredient in Germany's race to build an atomic bomb. To stop them, the Allies turned to sabotage. Not air raids, which risked civilian casualties and failure, but men on skis, shadows in the dark. Operation Gunnerside would become one of the most daring and successful acts of resistance in the war. But the official story left someone out. Ingrid Halvorsen was 28, an engineer who had once designed water filtration systems for Norway's hydroelectric grid. When Germany invaded in 1940, she was offered a position at Vemork under new management, Norsk Hydro, now co-opted by the Reich. She accepted, not out of loyalty, but necessity. Her brother had been arrested during a protest in Oslo. Ingrid knew the only way to protect him, and resist, was from the inside. She lived a double life. By day, she wore her ID badge and inspected pressure valves. By night, she wrote coded reports hidden in schematics, detailing production numbers, chemical processes, and guard rotations. Her contact in the resistance was a courier posing as a janitor. Their messages traveled by sled dog through the mountains to a British SOE handler in Stockholm. The information she supplied formed the blueprint for Gunnerside. The official team of Norwegian saboteurs, led by Joachim Ronneberg, parachuted into the wilderness in February 1943. They had been trained in Scotland, hardened by months in the cold, and equipped with explosives designed for precise demolition. But what they didn't know was that Ingrid had already prepared the plant from within. She had rerouted the coolant system to reduce pressure in the heavy water cells, weakening them structurally. She had forged maintenance logs that scheduled a security inspection the same night as the planned attack, diverting guards to upper levels. And most importantly, she had drawn a secret map of the steam tunnels, narrow, low, and ancient, which led directly to the electrolysis chambers. On February 27th, the saboteurs arrived. Under cover of darkness, they descended the gorge, crossed the icy river, and scaled the cliffs with ropes. At 12:45 a.m., they entered the tunnels. Ingrid was waiting. She had left the outer hatch unlocked, her signal a red scarf tied to a drainpipe. Inside, she met Ronneberg's team. They were shocked. None had expected help from the inside. But there was no time for introductions. She guided them past a pressure door, pointed to the storage tanks, and placed a finger to her lips. The guards were above, distracted by the faked power failure she had triggered minutes earlier. They set the charges with timers, plastic explosives rigged to destroy the cells but leave the plant structurally intact. Ingrid handed Ronneberg a second satchel. Unbeknownst to the SOE, she had smuggled out a sample of concentrated heavy water, stored in a reinforced thermos. It would later prove instrumental in confirming Nazi progress toward nuclear capability. As they made their escape, one of the saboteurs slipped on the icy stairs and dislodged a pipe. The clang echoed through the tunnels. A shout came from above. The team scattered. Ingrid did not run. She returned to her station, heart pounding, and faked surprise when the explosion rocked the building. Smoke poured through the ventilation shafts. Guards scrambled in confusion. By the time they reached the destroyed chamber, the saboteurs were gone, skiing into the wilderness, swallowed by snow. The German investigation was ruthless. Gestapo agents arrived within hours. Workers were interrogated, records seized, curfews imposed. Ingrid was questioned 5 times. She played her part flawlessly, citing her maintenance records and the presence of the same guards the Germans had themselves reassigned. She was released. But she knew she was living on borrowed time. 3 weeks later, Ingrid vanished. Official documents list her as disappeared, presumed dead. Some say she fled into the mountains and joined the partisans. Others believe she was executed secretly by German intelligence. Her name was never included in the list of Gunnerside heroes. Not out of malice, but omission. She had never been part of any official command. She had never held a gun. And yet, without her, the mission would have failed. In 1971, during the restoration of Vemork as a museum, a hidden compartment was discovered in the wall of the old engineer's office. Inside was a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. In careful handwriting, it detailed sabotage preparations, guard schedules, and chemical diagrams. On the last page was a short note: "If you find this, tell them I was not a traitor. I only wanted to stop the end of the world." British intelligence confirmed the handwriting as matching intercepted notes from 1942 labeled IH, the mysterious source whose maps had guided their efforts. Her name was added, quietly, to a file in the National Archives. But in Norway, her story remains largely unknown. The Tunnels of Vemork have become a symbol of ingenuity and resistance. School children visit, tourists walk the same paths where the saboteurs crept through snow. Few notice the rusted pressure valve near the steam tunnel entrance. Fewer still see the initials carved into the metal beneath it. IH. A silent signature. A quiet reminder. Ingrid Halvorsen may not have fired a single shot. But in the war to stop the atomic nightmare, she aimed with precision and struck with silence. In the bitter winter of 1944, among the endless barbed wire and chimneys of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a boy named Jacob Lewin wrote letters no one was meant to read. He had no pen, no paper, no postage. He used charcoal from burned wood, or blood when necessary, and scraps of cloth or torn labels from prisoner uniforms. He folded them, tucked them behind bricks, beneath floorboards, or under his thin straw mattress. 27 in all. He was 15 years old. Jacob had arrived at Auschwitz from the Lodz ghetto in the spring of that year, with his mother and younger sister, Miriam. He never saw them again after the selection ramp. What little he knew, he learned from whispered fragments and the direction the smoke blew. He had no number tattooed on his arm. His transport had arrived during a period when ink shortages made branding inconsistent. But he was recorded in the camp register as Lewin J. Fit for labor. In truth, Jacob was not fit for anything. Thin as wire, asthmatic, and often dazed, he survived only because he was assigned to a Sonderkommando work detail that maintained barracks. It was filthy, brutal work, scrubbing floors, emptying waste, hauling the bodies of those who died overnight. He did what he was told, said nothing, and memorized everything. The first letter was to his sister. "Miriam, I dreamed we were at the pond again, the one near Tuam Street. You were chasing geese, and I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. I haven't laughed in weeks. I try to remember the sound." He hid it in the barracks chimney, beneath a loose brick. A week later, another letter, this time to his mother. Then, another. And another. Jacob never imagined they'd be found. He wrote them not to communicate, but to remain himself, to hold on to memory, language, and the idea that someone, somewhere, still loved him. Each letter was a monument to normalcy, written amid industrial horror. He never mentioned gas chambers. He never used the word murder. But the truth was between the lines. "There is a boy named Felix who arrived 2 days ago. He is smaller than me, and he has no shoes. I gave him mine. I tell myself it's because I am strong, but really, it's because I am afraid of becoming like the men who do not look anymore." He wrote about bread that tasted of sawdust, about a German guard who secretly gave him a potato once, and how he bit into it raw, crying with gratitude and shame. He wrote about the sky, which he swore changed color when the smoke from the crematoriums blew overhead. In early December, Jacob helped clean out a storage shed that had caught fire. Inside, he found an old, rusted biscuit tin. He placed his most recent letters inside it and buried it beneath the floorboards of the barracks latrine, a place he knew no guard would linger too long. By January, the Soviets were advancing. Auschwitz was evacuated, and Jacob was sent on a death march toward the west. He didn't survive. He collapsed in the snow outside Gliwice, and his body was never officially identified. For decades, no one knew his name. Until 2007, when Polish researchers conducting a restoration project uncovered the tin box. Inside were brittle cloth scraps, paper shards, and ash-darkened words. Some were illegible. Others still shone with clarity, pain, and stubborn life. Sometimes I make up games. I try to remember all the smells of my street. Mama's hair oil. The bakery on the corner. The wet pavement when it rained. Today, it smelled only of fire. Historians at Yad Vashem authenticated the letters. Linguists reconstructed the handwriting. A single surviving school record from Lodz confirmed the phrasing and syntax matched a student named Jacob Lewin, born 1929. His name was added to the record of victims. In 2011, a small exhibition titled Letters from Ashes opened in Warsaw, featuring his writings. The letters were read aloud by children his age. Visitors wept at the words, not because they were poetic, but because they were so heartbreakingly mundane. He never wrote grand speeches or desperate pleas for help. He wrote about bread, rain, sleep. A single line from one letter was etched into the exhibit's final wall. If someone finds these, maybe they will know I was here. Jacob's writings are now studied in universities, not as literature, but as testimony. His voice, a voice silenced before it could deepen, pierces through time not with anger, but with aching humanity. In one of his last entries, dated only December, Jacob wrote, "I do not know what I will become. I do not think I will be a man. But if I had lived, I think I would have been kind." The barracks where Jacob once slept no longer stand. They were reclaimed by weather, rot, and time. But the letters survived. In glass cases, beneath museum lights, they still whisper. They do not ask for pity. They do not demand justice. They simply say, I was here. I lived. I mattered. In the shadow of smoke and silence, Jacob Lewin's words burn brighter than flame. You've seen the cracks behind the curtain, the shadows behind the uniforms, the names buried under numbers. These were the secrets war tried to erase, the ghosts that history almost silenced. But now that the box is open, you can't look away. And maybe that's the point. Not to forget what they tried to hide, but to remember, before it disappears again into ash, steel, and silence.